And last week, so last week we were talking about eggs, right? Ending off with a nice controversial discussion about odd numbers of eggs and things like that. But we won't dwell too much on that. Sorry, let me get my glasses on.
Sorry, can I ask one question?
Yeah, go for it.
I apologize, I wasn't here last week, but in Johannesburg, there seems to be a difference in kashrut or difference in outlook between white eggs and brown eggs.
Is there?
Heard that? Some people,
I remember somebody mentioning something like that once. I don't know what basis there would be for a difference between them. I mean, I don't know physically if it's a different breed of chicken or if they just like wash and bleach the eggs or something like that. I actually don't know enough to comment on that. But I assume that all of your eggs are standard battery eggs, which means it's actually very unlikely that any of them would actually be fertilized. So when you find something red inside the egg, it may not actually be blood, but it may just be a Maris iron thing. And since the eggs aren't particularly expensive, if it doesn't hurt too much financially to toss out an egg that's got blood in it, then you toss it out. Right, that would have been different back in in a time of like mamish poverty, when like an egg is really worth something, and then you take your egg to the rabbi and he looks at it and he tries to find a heter. Okay, right. So one of the point that we had about the egg was if you shech the chicken and find an egg inside the chicken. That's our interesting case is what's with the egg, if it is considered part of the chicken's body, or if it's considered already a separate egg and it's no longer part of the chicken's body, in which case it's considered parva. Now there was an interesting question that comes up. Let's say hypothetically, let's say you had a chicken, a live chicken, that has an egg developing inside it, and somehow it gets a big smack, and the egg separates out from the chicken before its time. So okay, so you have an immature egg gets pushed out of the chicken's body, and now you want to know, are you allowed to eat this egg? And why is this a question? Because, well, if it's part of the chicken's body still, isn't that a shayla of Eva min achai? You know what Eva min achai is, for those who are not familiar, but something that comes out of a living animal. That's something that even non-Jews are not allowed to eat. Okay, so anything that broke off or separated from an animal, aside from being it's coming from something that's not kosher, but for example, eating a live fish would be considered eating a live fish would be okay. I'm going to get myself into I'm just thinking ahead of some subtleties that Tos was going into, so I'm actually not even going to mention that, but something that is cut off a living creature is as a prohibition of Eva min achai, which even non-Jews are not permitted. So now the egg that's knocked out prematurely from the chicken's body, is that considered Eva min achai? Taz and the Shach actually both asked this question on eggs. So if the egg comes out, and we said that the dividing line that says that it's still part of the that it's still part of the chicken's body is the stage of it's actually machlokes. It's either that the yolk and the white are fully formed, or else it's that it's me'ora begidin, that it's still, if it's still attached with it's still got how do we explain it, that there was still some sort of physical attachment between the bird and the egg, so it looks like it's mixed up with sinews. Okay, so whatever your definition is of an egg that hasn't yet properly separated from the bird's body, if that that would be completely usher, said the Taz and the Shach, that it's if it's knocked out prematurely, that's not a fully formed egg, and it was part of the chicken's body, and so that would be Eva min achai, completely prohibited to eat. So then we ask the question, so since that egg is considered as if it's part of the chicken's body, if it's as to the extent that if you knocked it out prematurely, it would be Eva min achai. Then now let's take that same chicken with the same egg and shecht it, and cut it open and find the egg inside it. So now we just saw the Shulchan Aruch paskin that egg is actually permitted to eat with milk. So hold on, this looks like can you see where there's a contradiction over here? Because we're saying that if this egg is separate enough from the sorry, it's enough part of the chicken's body to be considered Eva min achai if it gets knocked out prematurely. Then what about if that same egg shechted inside the chicken's body, and now it's suddenly considering it as if it's a separate entity? It's not fleishiks, and we can cook it with milk. It seems to be a contradiction. Okay, are you with me on this? Okay. So the Shach ventures three answers on this. He says the first reason is the first answer he gives is that the reason that eggs are permitted to eat with milk is that since chicken and milk is only an Issa D'Rabbanan in the first place, so we can be makel by the eggs. Okay? When the Rabbanan came and said that chicken and milk is aser, they didn't go so far as to say the eggs, because why did we make chicken aser? Is because we didn't want you to come to eat beef with milk. But the egg is already like so far removed that the Chazal had no reason to aser the egg that was found inside the chicken. So yeah, it really is part of the chicken's body to the extent that it would be Eva min achai if it got knocked out, but there was no need to make an Isser D'Rabbanan on this egg to be cooked with milk. However, when it comes to Eva min achai, that's an Isser Torah, whether it's from a bird or from a mammal. It's Eva min achai is a complete Torah prohibition even for goyim. Okay, that's his first reason. He says another one, which is so since eggs and milk are mutar separately, so we're not machmir by basar b'chalav. If you had eggs and milk cooked together is completely mutar. So egg inside a chicken it's another angle on basically the same logic that egg inside chicken and milk is not there's no reason to make a gezerah on that. And the Shach has another little bit of lamdas over here that it says that the fact that the egg that comes out is Eva min achai doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually meat. And he brings the proof from the fact that milk, if the Torah did not explicitly permit us to have milk, then we would have our logic would have dictated that milk is also under the definition of Eva min achai, because it's something that separates from the animal while it's alive. So you should have said that milk is also completely prohibited to Jew and non-Jew alike. However, since the Torah has many psukim that talk about drinking milk and serving milk and land flowing with milk and honey, etc., it's pretty clear that that milk is permitted. Okay. And so eggs and eggs similarly would be asked if it wasn't for a pasuk that permits them, because we see that. Okay, let's just play quiz over here just to keep you all engaged. Where in the Torah do you see a proof that eggs are permitted? That's the one. It also gave me an opportunity to take a sip of my coffee. Thank you. Yeah, Shiloh Haken. That's exactly the source why we know that eggs are permitted. Sending away the mother bird so that you can have the eggs. Why would you want the eggs? To eat them. Okay. So eggs also would have been asked if we didn't have a pasuk that permitted them in terms of Eva min achai. And however, since hold on, since we regardless whether it's meat or milk. You know, I'm not following this explanation over here in my notes over here, and now I'm thinking about it again. So I'm actually I'm going to skip it, but it's not crucial for us over here. We just it was kind of more for enrichment over here that I mentioned it about eggs potentially being Ava Minachai. Okay, so we're going to go next to the next halacha in Shulchan Aruch, which is again Pei Zayin. Sif Vav. Okay, for those who are following along. So now we're going to talk about non-standard ways of cooking. When we've been talking about cooking up until now, we've been talking about boiling something in a pot, or barbecuing something. You know, having roasting where you have heat applied through some kind of moisture. The next point that the Shulchan Aruch brings up is about smoking, taking a smoker, and you know, you have this. I've actually never seen a smoker, but from what I've heard described, is you have it like basically a box, and you put the food that you want to smoke inside the box, and you put hot smoke through it, and the smoke gradually cooks the food. So that's one. That's one form of non-standard cooking that the Shulchan Aruch deals with here. Next one he says is mevushal b'chamei Tveria, something that's cooked in natural spring water, natural hot springs. So, for example, there are hot springs in Tiberias, or in South Africa at Warmbad. And so, or there are lots of places around the world. What's it? Yellowstone National Park. If you had to go and cook something in the hot springs there. So that it's not done by application of fire, or of a conventional heat. So if you had basa b'chalav cooked using that method, okay. So we just dealt with these two over here, smoking and natural hot springs. Ein lokin alav, a person would not get lashes for cooking meat and milk together using that method. Those are not considered cooking from that perspective. Okay, now he switches back to substances that are like milk, but are not entirely milk, but are not actually considered real milk. Now, what's mei chalav? If anyone knows anything about the cheese making process, you put your milk into a container, and I think you heat it up, and then you put some sort of rennet, or some catalyst that makes all of the curds stick together. Okay, and so you get this thick clump of cheese in the middle, and what's left behind is this very thin, lightly colored water. So that's that. So the term for that in English is the curds. That's what you make the cheese out of, and the water that's left behind is called whey. Okay, and you know this from the little Miss Muffet sat on her tuffet, right?
Curds and whey, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. You passed the test, Donna. Hold on a second. Don't you teach little children or something like that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Okay. So we're moving into your.
Never even heard nursery rhymes.
Okay, so curds and whey. So the curds is the mamish chalav stuff. That's real milk. You take that out. You're left behind with the whey. The whey in Hebrew is mei chalav. That's the water that's left behind after the milk. Okay, or the chalav meisa, milk from a dead animal. Now that means that it wasn't milked. If it was milked while it was alive, that's real milk. If you shechted the animal and it fell on its side and had a full udder, and some milk seeps out of its udder. Okay, and that milk that comes out after the animal is dead is not considered full-blown milk. Okay, or b'chalav zachar. Now that's an interesting phenomenon, which is both with humans and with animals. It's possible for males to create a substance called colostrum, which is it's actually it's quite a funny thing. I've heard of stories. It's quite rare, but I've heard of men who, when their wives were pregnant, started generating colostrum that comes out of their nipples, and it's similar to female milk. It's not a common thing, but it happens to humans, happens to animals, that a male will actually produce a kind of a milk, and that also is not considered like milk from Minatora. Okay, chalav zachar, or should be shel dam b'chalav, or let's say you've got regular milk, and now you take something that's if you got blood from an animal and you cook that in milk, is that considered bas b'chalav? And the answer in all these cases is no, pater. Not that it's allowed, not that you're allowed lichatchila to do something like this, but if somebody went ahead and cooked meat in any of these different ways, like smoking, cooked meat and milk using smoking or hot springs, or cooked meat with all of these not really milk things, like we said with whey, or with a dead animal's milk, or with male colostrum, or if you took real milk and cooked blood in it. In all of these cases, there's no penalty for it after the fact. But in lokin alachila, and furthermore, if somebody went and ate them, then you don't get lashes for eating something that was prohibited. So now that's aside from the blood aspect, because the blood itself is prohibited. But in all the other cases where you have two permitted ingredients, then you wouldn't get in the times of the Sanhedrin, you wouldn't get lashed for eating this mixture.
The milk that comes from the dead animal's udder, though, is that usher? It's a nevela already, right? If it's dead.
No, we're talking about a shechted animal.
Right. Oh, all right. Okay.
So it was shechted kosher, and then after it died, some milk dripped out of its udder. And he went and collected the milk. Now, what's the status of that milk? It's not considered chalavi in the respect of that there will be a penalty for cooking meat in it. It's now an interesting question, actually, if that milk would actually make you fleishik. If you drank it, would it make you fleishiks? So it's that's an interesting little discussion in itself, which I don't know if we're even going to get into. But it's not, suffice to say, it's not your classic case of milk, and there would be no penalty for cooking meat in it. And when we hear that as well, we also hear that it's not going to be prohibited. It's most likely not going to be asur b'hana, that you will be allowed to feed it to your dog if you did go ahead and cook something like that. I think that is the case, but now that I say that, I'm a little bit of doubt is creeping into my mind. So I may stand corrected at some point. Okay, so Adkan, that's the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber. The Ramah has a long comment on this whole thing, wherein he says that chalav zachar, male milk, lo mikri chalav klal. It's not called milk at all. It's just has no shaykhs to being called milk. And im nafal letoch keder shel basar en oser. And if it fell into if you had male milk that fell into a cholent, it's completely mutar. Aval chalav meisa, but milk that comes from a dead animal. Umei chalav oshem hamachal kamo chalav atzma. But the whey and the milk from a dead animal do prohibit the mixture, just like regular milk. So while you wouldn't get lashes for it, says the Ramah, you would not be allowed to eat it. Up to the proportion of one. If it's more than 1 in 60, you would not be allowed to eat it. And you should not use it for cooking. Why was this be relevant again is for the Jew who's working for the non-Jew. If the non-Jew tells him, take this whey and cook my meat in it, and the Jew's got to say, I can't really do that. Okay. יש לאסור לכתחילה, וכן. יש אומרים דאסר לחטוס האש תחת קדרה. Okay. He also, while he's on the subject of maybe thinking of Jews working for non-Jews, here we have a situation that the Ramah gives us of the non-Jew has employed the Jew, and he says to the Jew, do me a favor, go and stoke the fire under my pot over there. And the Jew's got to think in his head, what if that pot contains basar b'chalav? Okay. So the Ramah says there are those who say that this is prohibited to stoke the fire that's under the goy's pot, because they sometimes cook milk and they sometimes cook meat in it, even if it's not milk and meat right now in that pot. There's a possibility that he cooked milk in it this morning, and now he wants to cook meat in the same pot, and there's a taste of milk that's going to be cooked with this meat, and now you're going to be cooking basar b'chalav. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm going to skip the line. Okay, it's just explaining the same point. עוד כספת אין לערב מים שדיחו בהם כלי בשר. Okay, so here's now let's say you've got dishwater. And another case over here, you've got hot dishwater. You washed up your fleischiks kli inside some hot dishwater, and cleans it out nicely. Okay, and now you've got another basin of hot water that you use to rinse out your milchiks. So, and you had real milchiks in the one and real fleischiks in the other. So now, are you allowed to pour out the two waters into the same drain at the same time? Because now you've got hot fleishik water and hot milchik water, and they're mixed together. And that's, while everything is hot together, you're actually now cooking the meat with the milk in this situation. So that's another, even though you're pouring it down the drain, the fact you've got to remember that cooking itself is a prohibition. Okay, so if they are still hot, then that can be problematic, says the Ramah.
I knew a Rav from where I came in the States, a very prominent Rav, so I don't want to mention any names, but he used to have two garbage cans in the house, in the kitchen, because he said if we have something hot from the fleishik and you happen to take some dairy or milk and you put it in there, now you have basar b'chalav. So he said I have two, and that's
okay. That's a great chumrah. if you want to have a separate, if you're in the habit of tossing hot things into the bin, then you might want to avoid the possibility of accidentally cooking basar b'chalav in your garbage. Yeah, and I've mentioned too many times the story. Yeah.
Was the Isur intended simply cooking them together, or cooking them together for the purpose of eating? I mean, if they're going down the drain,
that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. Is that actually the first? What does the pasuk say? Lo tevashel gedi b'chalevimo. If the pasuk, and we said that there were three things that we learned out, because the pasuk is repeated three times, we learned that it's asur to cook them together, it's asur to eat them together, and hana. Okay, so those three things. Now, what would we have learned if the pasuk had only been mentioned once? What would we have learned?
Bishul.
Exactly, because it's lo tevashel gedi b'chalevimo. That's the first mitzvah that we learn out of it. Is that it's cooking. Who said anything about eating? Second pasuk comes and says, now that it's been cooked together, we also can't eat it. And the third one comes together and says, not only can't you eat it, but you also can't get any benefit from it. Okay, but that's actually the starting point. You're thinking about not eating it, and hang on, but maybe the reason why we can't cook is that we can't eat it. Adarabba, it's the other way. It's the other way around. The reason why you can't eat it is because it was asur to cook them together. You hear that?
Got you.
Okay, so it's just
Can I ask another question?
Please do.
We say that the Torah speaks in the Lashon of Bnei Adam.
Yes.
And the Torah is also Divrei Elokim Chaim. What was Bishul eons ago was a kadera, fire underneath it. And you boiled stuff, you cooked stuff in it. But today we can cook things in a hot air cooker. We can cook things, as you said, in a smoker.
In a
Why is that
microwave.
considered bishul today? So that, you know, you say that you don't get malchus, but why is that? Why isn't that bishul?
Why? So why is it or why isn't it?
Why is it not?
Yeah, we kind of, that's a bigger question that you're asking. Is that the Torah that we received on Sinai was given to people who had, you know, certain technology. You know, they had certain ways of cooking and certain, you know, a certain
Right.
derech hachaim, and you know, we're presented with the challenge of understanding how that Torah applies to brand new situations that our ancestors never dreamed of, like, for example, microwave ovens, electricity. Our ancestors didn't know anything about a dateline, right? Because Mistama, they thought the world was flat. It was a long time before people came into the round Earth theory, and before they understood that actually you can travel around the other side of the world, and then you're going to have a definition of where does Sunday become Monday. So yeah, that's really what you need the poskim for, the people with the big shoulders who can look into the original sources and say, what is considered cooking. We have, is a microwave considered cooking? Because microwave cooking is itself a whole new thing. There's no fire, and if you put meat and milk together in a microwave, now, I mean, that's very, very relevant to the point of halacha that we're looking at right now. Is what's the din of a microwave if you cooked meat and milk together in a microwave, because they're in contact, but the heat source is coming from something that's basically just jiggling the particles inside the food and making it warm up by making the water particles move faster.
But I would think that would lead to something of Maris Ayin, because if I went into your house and you was in the microwave and you were doing milk cooking.
No, nobody's saying lechatchila. Nobody's saying lechatchila you can, but now we're asking the question: if somebody went ahead and cooked meat and milk in the microwave, an accident, what's the din of that? Is that considered cooking? Is it considered cooking to the point where it's so asr that you can't even feed it to your dog? So I don't honestly know. I don't know what the answer is over there, but you need some poskim on that, and I really should get a clear answer to that, because microwaves are so common. Like every household almost has a microwave. So
I saw a shir I went to. There's a machloket between the Iglay Tal and the Igrot Moshe about microwaves, and whether or not it's considered the regular way of cooking.
Yeah.
And how you define the regular way of cooking. And if I remember correctly, the Iglay Tal defined the regular way of cooking in terms of outcome, and he therefore held that a microwave wasn't the regular way of cooking because you can taste the difference. It's clearly not traditional. Whereas Rav Moshe said, this is the way people cook, and this was already in the 70s. Everybody's going to happen, therefore it's definitely cooking, and he held that it was outright.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
It came up ironically because one of the people at this show was doing, he was on Miluim, and they didn't exercise with the Americans. And the question came, apparently Americans get these meals ready to eat as part of the army, where it's got a chemical basis, then you have to light it, or you break something and then it heats up. And he wanted to know whether he was allowed to heat up the food from one of the American compatriots, which might be basar b'chalav, and it degenerated into discussion about all the different ways of heating, like microwaves, etc. It was fascinating stuff.
Very good, very good. Okay, so my homework is I'm going to have to get some clearer answers about microwave cooking, because it's exactly relevant to this CF over here. Yes.
Can I ask a relevant Shiloh.
Please
Can
do.
we cook meat and milk on the same fire, on the same stove, on the same hot plate?
Are you saying
In
at the
sep-
same
in separate
time?
pots, in separate pots
Are you talking about at the same time?
at the same time?
Okay.
Can you put a pot with meat, a pot with milk on the fire at the same
Okay.
time?
So my answer is going to be yes, but.
Okay.
Yes, but it's a very bad idea. Because if everything is happy and your lids on the pot stay
Yeah.
closed and nothing splashes, it's
Yeah.
fine. It's fine. But the problem is that pots tend to splash. And we're going to get onto a later parak in a later chapter of the Shulchan Aruch, Simon Tzadi base, to be exact, is the situations of splashes when you have, say, a splash of milk hits the outside even of a fleshika pot, and things don't go well from there. So if I can recommend any kind of chumrah in your household about cooking meat and milk on the same stove, don't do it at the same time. Really don't do it at the same time, because that's a way of trafing up your pots. It can maybe like a teeny little spritz might not make a huge difference, but if you know exactly where it is and it doesn't move, then that can also cause a problem, and you might wind up having to re-kosher your pots. So I really recommend against it. And as a matter of fact, if you have a frying pan on the stove, and it's a good idea to make sure that all kalim of opposite men, all food of opposite men, are cleared away from the area of the stove, because let's say you're frying some kind of chicken schnitzels, okay? You're frying chicken schnitzels, and next to it over there, you've got a perfectly innocent milk kli or piece of cheese or whatever, and spritz comes a bit of oil that comes off your schnitzels, hits your thing, and now where it hit, if you can't say it's batel. You can't use bittul b'shishim over here, because bittul b'shishim only works when it's all been mixed around. But when you know where that oil landed, you're going to have to cut away from your. If it landed on the cheese, you have to cut away the cheese. If it landed on a kli, depending on how hot it was, it's possible that you may need to re-kosher the kli. So I'm not saying definitely you need to, and each case you have to look at the specific facts of that particular case. But the stove is a good place to be very machmir about what you put there at the same time, especially where there are the possibilities of splashes. So I'm looking at your frying pan. That's the frying pans. That's the matzah of frying pans. They splash.
So then, is there a difference between what you're talking about on a stove and what you're talking about in a microwave? If they are in closed containers, it's advisable not to, but it's allowed if you have to.
You're saying that if you put two, if you put two containers in the microwave at once, one with milk and one with meat.
Yeah. Is there a difference?
Yeah. Again, my first instinct is to say that's a really bad idea. But if somebody does it, can you say that it's wrong? And just on my first thoughts about it is that, assuming that there's no steam involved, you can probably get away with it. When steam starts getting involved, if you've got something that's got a lot of liquid, and even in the microwave it starts generating steam, then the steam is going to start getting complicated. I don't want to get too much into it, because that's for a later chapter. But in terms of that, again, it's I recommend against it. Okay. Where was I? I was in the Ramah over here, and it's very small print, so I've got to try and find where I was again. We were talking about dishwater. Let's see about that. what kasud klish also maim the khafifas harosh. Okay, then he talks about pots that are used not for food but for making shampoo. There was a formula, you know, that they didn't sort of go to the supermarkets and buy a bottle of Head and Shoulders. They used to have their own recipe for making shampoos in those days, which often involved ashes, often involved whatever. You have no idea. I have no idea what kind of formulas they used for shampoo, but it you know, they're all kind of home brews, and sometimes אין לשמש בו תעשים אופר shalakira, because they use the ashes, and the ashes come from the stove, and those ashes sometimes contain meat, sometimes contain milk, and people would mix them. People would mix that. So therefore, it's usher to use that pot afterwards for food. No, don't. Okay, you wouldn't do that anyway, and you're wrinkling your nose, and perhaps you know, a lot of the cases that we see just in general in Shulchan Aruch and Gemara are cases that we look at, you know, in our modern eyes and say, or we don't do things that way, but nonetheless there's value in learning them, because there are principles that can be extended to things that are more common. So, you know, it's more important, I think, to understand the principles of what we're learning than necessarily the specific cases. So if you know the principles, then you can apply them to any case. That's sort of the halachic equivalent of teach a man to fish,
Yeah.
rather than giving him the fish. Okay. Anything else over here that I wanted to bring out? Okay, fine. And okay, so back into the notes over here. So the smoking is, I mean, in terms of smoking as a way of cooking, I mean, smoking existed in the time of the Gemara, because the Gemara actually deals with it. In the Yerushalmi, the Gemara asks if there's din of bas b'chalav by meat and milk that were smoked together. And actually, the question, and the Maggid Mishnah also says that the same. The question is also by cooking in the hot springs of Tiberia, and the question's left unanswered in the Gemara. So now the Rambam comes later, you know, by a couple centuries later, a few centuries later, and says in both cases there's ein lo ken, which means no lashes for somebody who did cook using smoking or hot springs. But the question is it nonetheless an issa d'oraisa, just without the punishment of lashes, to do this? So according to Maggid Mishnah, since basa b'chalav is an issa d'oraisa, we have to be strict in these cases and say that you're not allowed to do it. Even though there's you know, it's not clear, but because we have a safek, we have a principle that when we have a safek in a d'oraisa, we have to be machmir. If we don't know what the halacha is, and there's a possibility that we're going to be transgressing a Torah din, or if there's a machlokes of poskim and we haven't got a clear psak between them, then we want to take the stringent view, because you know, we don't want to mess around with d'oraisas, where there's a lot more wiggle room when it comes to d'rabbanans, as we'll see in many places. Okay. Yeah. So Pri Chadash says that is quoted also by the Vilna Gaon. He says that actually the question is answered, because he cross references with a Gemara Yerushalmi in Shabbos, and in there it says that it asks the question about smoking food on Shabbos, and what it says is that it's asur to smoke food on Shabbos. Now you're not allowed to cook food on Shabbos. So, and he said it's because of bishul. So says the Pri Chadash, we can infer the same thing by basa b'chalav. It's if it's cooking for Shabbos, it's cooking for basa b'chalav. Okay. So according to these opinions, cooking through smoking would also be asa b'hana. You would it's mamish cooking, and if somebody cooked something together by smoking or in hot springs, then it would be asa b'hana. You couldn't feed it to your dog. However, the Aruch HaShulchan comes and says no, the two cases are not comparable. Why? Because on Shabbos we have a din of when we have just a quick little thing pointer on Shabbos halachas is that we have we have 39 malachas on Shabbos, 39 avos malacha, the main category, but we also have toldas of the main category. So for example, just to start by Zoreya is planting. So you're not allowed to plant things on Shabbos. Then there's also watering plants on Shabbos. You can't water plants on Shabbos, but there's no av malacha that says you're not allowed to water the plants. Watering is a tolda. It's a derivative malacha of zoreya. Now, just because it's derivative doesn't mean it's a derabanan. It's also prohibited min haTorah, but it's from the same category as the zoreya. So if somebody planted something and somebody watered the plant, it's the same issa Torah, but it's all under the one category. So now the Aruch HaShulchan says over here that smoking food on Shabbos is a tolda of bishul. So if it's a tolda of bishul, then it's asa min haTorah to cook by smoking on Shabbos. Okay. However, it says that doesn't apply by basa b'chalav. Basa b'chalav, all that we know is bishul. We don't have any halach. Nowhere does it say that we have to worry about toldas of bishul. For as far as basa b'chalav is concerned, all that we know is bishul is aser. So he says he dismisses that and says that's not a proof. It's not a proof, and therefore he says that smoking. The Aruch HaShulchan comes and says that no, that smoking is an issur d'Rabbanan, and therefore it would, if somebody did actually smoke milk and meat together, he wouldn't be allowed to eat it, but he would be allowed to feed it to his dog. And okay. So I beg your pardon. That's not the Aruch HaShulchan doesn't paskin like that. He quotes the Levush and infers from the Shach basically he says that the Levush and the Shach both say that it comes out as a derabanan, but he disagrees. The Aruch HaShulchan says, having quoted these opinions, he says, look, it's a safek d'oraisa. You have poskim who say that meat and milk that were smoked together is prohibited min haTorah, and you have those who say it's permitted to benefit min haTorah, but nonetheless it's a Torah din that we're arguing about over here, and since it's a Torah din that we're arguing about, we're saying safek d'oraisa, and we're going to go lechumra. And right, and although we have another posek who's the Chochmas Adam is also more modern posek, who says that no, it still does come out as an issur d'oraisa, and it would be permitted b'hana. So if that ever comes up lahalacha, do be sure to ask a shaila, because it may depend on how severe the need is. Because in cases like this, we may be able to rely on the poskim who say that who say that it's mutar to benefit from it, at least, even though nobody will say it's mutar to eat, but there are poskim who'll say that it's permitted to benefit from it. All right, so we're out of time. Are there any questions?
No.
Okay, we exhausted all the questions for during the session. Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming.
Yashar.
Okay, and we'll see you next week.
Good night.
Hashem.
Good night. Bye everyone.
Okay.
Bye Larry.
Bye.
Down.